Our scripture lesson this morning comes from the first chapter of Mark, beginning with the 21st verse. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath, after he went into the synagogue, he began to teach. And they were astounded by his teaching, for he was teaching as one who has authority, and not like the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he called out, saying, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One from God." And Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, come out from him." And after the unclean spirit convulsed him and cried out in a loud voice, he came out from him. And they were all amazed, as they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He even commands the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And his fame went out immediately everywhere into the whole region of Galilee. I think everybody here knows that next Sunday is the third most important day in the Christian year. I mean, right after Easter and Christmas, Super Bowl Sunday is universally recognized as a high and holy day for the church, where men and women take time from their daily toil to focus on what's most important, or at least should be most important. And they gather together as congregations in reverent, holy places that serve beer and chicken wings. And there they feel a special communion with the heroes of the past. You know, saints who have run the big race, have run the good race. Men like Lombardi and Landry, Hallis and Brown, Unitas and Bradshaw. Well, not Bradshaw, he's still alive, but you know what I mean. Now, that's happening next Sunday. But of course, that also means that fans of 30 teams are at least a little disappointed right now, because their season didn't turn out the way they wanted. And I'll tell you, that certainly includes me. And although I'm going to watch the game, and I really will, as soon as Tom Brady lifts up the trophy, my mind's going to shift to the next season. And I'll tell you, I think most fans will look to the next fall in one of two ways. I mean, on one hand, some fans, some supporters of teams are going to be really, really optimistic. For example, they're fans of good. If they're fans of good teams, they expect their team to get that one player that'll put them over the top. And if they're fans of fair teams, they're thinking that maybe next year they'll take that step to actually becoming good. And if they're fans of a bad team, well, they expect to be happy with being able to say in January 2019, maybe next year, and actually mean it. Now, those are the optimists. On the other hand, there are others who are even now getting depressed because they know their team's going to stink next year, just like it did last year. They're the ones who are sure that the coach and the GM and everybody associated with the team, they're all idiots and are 12 months away from getting fired, if they're lucky. And they're already expecting to be celebrating a perfect season, and I'm not talking about 16-0. Now, I think you could call these happy folks pessimists, and this is just how they see their gray little world. And you know, with this pessimistic business, well, it seems to me that that's the way a lot of Christians see the world around them. I mean, let's face it, I think we've all known believers who have a vision that's pretty negative. You know, those who, based on what they say and even how they look, seem to be sure of only two things. First, that the world is heading for hell in a handbasket, and two, that things are just getting worse. Now, that's what they believe. And I'll tell you, although I'd rather not admit it, this kind of attitude has traditionally been associated with Presbyterians. For example, years ago, and I'm talking about years ago, I was told that the amazing thing about Presbyterians is that they can do anything they want. You realize that? They can do anything they want. They just can't enjoy it. Now, that's what I heard. And I'll tell you, if that applied to only Presbyterians, I think we all know a lot of Methodists and Baptists who better consider changing their membership. Of course, these are the pessimists who generally look either sad or worried most of the time and are really only happy when something happens that confirms just how crummy the world really is, and I'll tell you, it always does. Like I heard once a long time ago, a pessimist is never disappointed. Now, they're on one side. On the other side, though, are folks who I like to call grinning Christians. They've lost their job. The bank has just taken the house, and their car was hit by a semi. But golly gee, God just makes them feel happy, inside, outside, all the time. Man, sometimes you just want to slap them. But I'll tell you, before you do, spend a little time talking with them and getting to know them. Because when you do, often they're not as happy as they seem to be on the surface. You see, most of these folks are taught that if you have faith, and I'm talking about real faith, Jesus will just step in and solve all your problems. You know, he'll pay your bills, he'll fix your marriage, he'll raise your kids. And that's what they not only want to believe themselves, but want others to think they believe. And so when the debts are getting deeper and deeper, bigger and bigger, and they can't shake the marital problems, and the kids are struggling with the same kind of problems kids have always faced, my goodness, not only are these folks disappointed, they actually begin to worry that God has kind of let them go. I'm telling you, just like football fans do at the end of every season, Christians often face the present and the future as either sad pessimists or with expectations that are really unrealistic and which nearly always lead to disappointment. Man, I've even known Christians who could somehow walk on both sides of the street at the same time. And you know, that's why I think this passage is so important for the faithful. To not only read, but believe. And I'll tell you why. In these verses dealing with Jesus beginning his ministry in Capernaum, I think Mark offers us both good news and news that's not so good. I mean, Mark is certainly clear and frank about what's going on in the real world. And I'm talking about the world within which Jesus did his thing, and within which right now we live. Let me explain. Not only do we find people, even leaders in the church, because they were in the synagogue, who were just like the scribes in his day, folks who hung around the synagogue, but who didn't speak with much authority. Not only are they present in the world, there are also folks running around with unclean spirits, even among the faithful, even in church. And you know, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in a metaphysical world with supernatural demons possessing people. Frankly, I'm not sure I believe that either. Still, it's hard to avoid the fact that Mark had very few illusions about what a Christian can expect in the real world. Man, he wasn't looking at life through rose-colored glasses, not in this passage. Man, the synagogue was a pretty dismal place. And yet, in the middle of all this, there's also some incredibly good news, isn't there? And it all centers on Jesus. I mean, not only did his teaching astound folks at the synagogue because he was teaching as one who has authority and not like the scribes, but when he was face to face with that man with an unclean spirit, I'm talking about a person gripped by evil itself, Jesus rebuked that spirit, saying, "Be silent and come out from him." And after the unclean spirit convulsed him and cried out with a loud voice, he came out from him. And they were all amazed as they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this, a new teaching with authority? He even commands unclean spirits, and they obey him." And his fame went out immediately everywhere into the whole region of Galilee. In other words, in this passage, we have two pretty good glimpses at the world in which we live. And I'll tell you something, I think we need to remember this as we live our lives, with all the ups and downs we face. Because if we do, rather than being unrealistic and disappointed or a bunch of sad pessimists, we can be realistic optimists. I mean, on one hand, we can be realistic in our expectations, recognizing that life just can be tough. and deciding that we're not going to pin our hopes on false and empty illusions. I mean, let's face it. Some of the people we trust the most, sometimes they let us down. And my goodness, evil is a reality in our world. That's just the way it is. And if you don't believe it, just thumb through the newspaper when you get home. The world is a tough place. It was for Jesus and his disciples, and it is for us. And when we accept this, well, maybe it will lead us to become more active in dealing with our problems. For example, if our finances are shaky, instead of just trusting that God will somehow work them out, maybe we should also stop spending so much money. I mean, duh. And instead of just praying about difficulties in our marriage, maybe we should also seek out a professional who can give us some practical ideas about how we can work things out. And instead of just turning our kids over to God, whatever that means, maybe we should also consider our whole approach to discipline and maybe even our definition of good behavior. In other words, instead of waiting for God to step in and carry us through our problems, maybe we should be a little more realistic and take a few steps ourselves. But that's only half of what we can take from this passage. On the other hand, I think it also gives us some good reasons to be optimistic. Optimistic in the way we see the world as it is and the world as it will be. Optimistic as we live our lives. I mean, good night, nurse, the one whom the crowds in the synagogue said had authority, well, he still has it. And he still offers us good, solid, practical advice as we try to do the best we can with what we've got. As well as wonderful, comforting spiritual words that can keep us going even when we feel ready to quit. Man, Jesus still has authority. Just like he still has power. Power to cast out demons and to still storms. Power to free us from those inner drives and feelings that can get us into real trouble. And power to overcome the highest obstruction and the deepest obstacle. We still follow the one who has power. And I'll tell you, that's a pretty good thing to know. Because when we do, when we understand the authority and feel the power, we'll be able to face the future with hope, with assurance and with confidence that no financial and no marital and no family problem can shake, much less break us. You see, we can become optimists, realistic optimists, as we live in the present and move into the future. And you know what? That's the exact attitude I hope I'm able to carry into the off season. You see, rather than being either Little Mary Sunshine or a Junior George Costanza, I hope I'm able to be a realistic optimist as I think about what's going to happen with my Indianapolis Colts next year. But more than just with football. After today, I hope we're all able to become more realistic and more optimistic as we move through life. Because although we may know that life certainly is not a bowl of cherries, we still worship the one who has both authority and power. And if that doesn't cause a person to be a realistic optimist, I don't know what will. Amen.